भारत ने एक अभूतपूर्व सिद्धि हासिल की है। भारत ने आज अपना नाम अंतरिक्ष महाशक्ति स्पेस पावर के रूप में दर्ज करा दिया है।
Good morning and Jai Hind. On behalf of the Indian Space Association, I welcome all the eminent speakers, our members, and all the members of the audience on this first space track where an interaction between the armed forces and the private companies is going on here today. This has happened for the first time, and it is my privilege and honor to welcome all of you, all the stakeholders. As you all know, for the first 6 decades, all our space history was led by ISRO, who have ensured that we are a power to reckon with as far as space goes. This started with Dr. Sarabhai, but ISRO's declared intention all throughout has been that it has kept away from the armed forces. And this was in later years also because of the sanctions regime which was imposed, especially after the nuclear tests we had carried out. But this itself was a blessing in disguise because it resulted in Atmanirbharta within India, because ISRO could train and bring up a few of our industry players in India itself. And those are the ones who would take on and now lead us to the next space movement which is going on. For the military communications and remote sensing, which we call and translates to ISR, has been carried out by ISRO for some time. We have satellites up there in space which are meeting our requirements. But the last decade, world over, is where the private sector has entered. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Virgin Galactic, they have brought in disruptive technologies, and the concept that the space sector, which was led by the government, is now being led by private players. In India too, in June 2020, our government decided to open private space to private sector. And that is where some of the structures like InSpace, which was inaugurated 3 days back, the creation of ISPA last year, and all these activities started. We in ISPA are looking at creating a world-class space ecosystem in India. And one of the major users of space, which has been traditionally there, though now commercialization has started, has been the armed forces. And that is why we are privileged and honored to have all lead players in the Indian Armed Forces who look after various dimensions of space. I would not speak more, but welcome the first speaker, that is Air Marshal B.R. Krishna, PVSM, AVSM, Shaurya Chakra, ADC, Chief of Integrated Defense Staff to the Chairman, COSC. A very tongue twister, but in brief, we call it CISC. Air Marshal B.R. Krishnan was commissioned as a fighter pilot in the Indian Air Force in December 1883. In his distinguished career, which is up till now 38 years, he's been a qualified flying instructor and an experimental test pilot, and has flown a variety of fighters, transport aircrafts, and helicopters, anything in the inventory of the Indian Air Force. He has a flying experience of nearly 5,000 hours, including operational, instructional, and test flying. He is an alumnus of NDC, where I had the privilege to be there along with him. And during his illustrious career, he has held most of the important command and staff appointments. I would not go through all his assignments which he has done. The last one before he took over as CISC on 1st October 21 was as an Air Officer commanding Western Air Command. He would speak to us on space in modern conflict, emerging trends and lessons. Over to you, Air Marshal Krishna. You would like to sit down or you would start?
Jai Hind, good morning. I will thank the chairman of the session, General Bhatt, my co-panelist, and Jai Hind, and good morning to all of you. I think if you need to be in space, you better stand up. So that's why I'm standing up here. Firstly, it is an honor and to be part of this prestigious seminar, and I thank ISPA for organizing this. It is nice to be among the galaxy of eminent people and the audience who is here. And let me start first with Socrates, I think the Greek philosopher, who said that man must rise above the earth to the top of the atmosphere and beyond, for only thus will he fully understand the world he lives in. And so true what he said years ago. I think he understood the importance of space even in those times, and that is what we are trying to grapple with today. Later, Clausewitz had mentioned the occupation of the high ground can thus be a genuine domination. Its reality is undeniable. I think from the earliest days of armed conflict, military forces have endeavored to occupy the high ground of the battlefield, whether it be a hill, a mountain, the air, the space. We heard of balloons, and they want to take the advantage to able to see across the horizon over the adversary. I think the technology has advanced to where the space has become the new high ground, and therefore space superiority automatically becomes the new rallying point. During the Cold War, we have seen about 93% of the space launches and the satellites were made by the erstwhile USSR and the USA. Now the majority of them are in fact, as they call 90% of the launches are by the commercial entities. So it is completely different sort of situation now, and more than 70 countries have now their own space programs. It is interesting to note that high degree of secrecy that once shrouded the Cold War, especially on the space-based assets, no longer exists. Where today's unclassified open information and particularly satellite images allows analysts to identify troop movements, reveal deployment of military equipment, track the real-time evolution of conflict. Alongside the space advantages it offers, it also creates a whole new sort of vulnerabilities, some of which relate to increasing congestion in the space. In 2015, we had over 1,200 satellites, and this increased by 50% in 2018. It is predicted that there could be about 60,000 satellites in the next decade. A key concern is the proliferation of the orbital debris and how it could cause an irreversible situation in the space. The race to the space is getting highly competitive, congested, and contested. Looking to the future, the wars will still be determined by what is happening on the ground, which means conflict on Earth will directly affect what happens in space. Tensions on Earth will be reflected in space. Space is no way decoupled the way things happen on the ground. Countries across the world have started reorganizing space as a new domain to protect their assets, which have been highlighted by formation of the new space commands or aerospace forces or the space agency as we have in our own country. The initial exploitation of space was driven by the national prestige how the importance of space was demonstrated during the Gulf War in the 1990s. This was the watershed moment in the military history. We all know that how space was an enabler, be it communications, GPS, navigation, precision targeting, space-based surveillance, early warning against incoming scuds, weather, etc. I think over the last 30 years from the Gulf War, the role of space and its significance has grown exponentially. Space capabilities have evolved in this technology-driven world. Without realizing, we have become dependent on space technology, and space has become integral to military operations. The LEO and the GEO orbits are becoming hotbeds of communication and experimentation activity. Nations have developed capabilities to access space during conflicts. People have developed anti-satellite missile tests, disabling satellites by destroying them. And they could simply spray a paint on the electro-optics of the satellite, snap the communication antenna, disable the satellites by jamming and spoofing, using lasers to damage the delicate satellite components, or even hijack transmissions to and from ground to the space. A little peep into the space-based capabilities in the ongoing Ukraine conflict. I think we all have been watching this for more than 100 days. It has indeed highlighted the importance of uninterrupted access to space. It is said there are over 50 active satellites in the sky over Ukraine. Some of these are providing real-time SAR images, access of space-based internet services. The unprecedented OSINT and GEOINT by satellites has been a game changer. Reports of GPS jamming, cyber attacks against satellites has dictated the importance of cyber defense of satellites. More importantly, beside significance of space capabilities, the conflict has underlined the growing role of non-state commercial space entities in shaping the modern-day conflict. We know the graphics dispatches from the war zone have played upon the international community. The poignant images have opened the eyes of people to see what can be achieved from space, a total infowar dominance. Space has become a forum to sort out geopolitical agendas. Take the example of International Space Station, where the space cooperation has taken a hit. Even the launch of the OneWeb satellites has been denied. And parallelly, there is a space cooperation, as we all know, is the Artemis Accords, which is meant to guide countries to explore together the outer space, and as of now, 14 countries have signed it. Parallelly, Russia and China are also cooperating in space. India has been amongst the leading spacefaring nations, and thus it is important that we develop our own space security strategy to safeguard our space infrastructure and develop assertive defense capabilities that is credible to deter inimical forces from attacking our sovereignty in space. Any peace needs credible protection. We need to assume space leadership. I think we are at the cusp of transformation in the country, and we need to use this opportunity. India as a growing power needs to dominate space, for which we should be Atmanirbhar, as was mentioned earlier. A few words about what we are doing in the armed forces. I think in the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen flurry of changes and noticeable actions. We have understood and accepted the requirement of integrated efforts towards becoming a space power. And way back in about 2018-19, we established the Defense Space Agency. Also, a new arm in the DRDO has been created, which works closely with the Space Agency to meet all the future requirements of the armed forces to enable, exploit the existing technologies and assets. Parallelly, capacity building with respect to space and strategic demands of India's security, and involve and sustain research and development in the cutting-edge space-related technologies. The military opportunities are boundless, and we are discovering it almost daily. Space warfare is now a definite and a tangible prospect as the space technologies have been adopted and assimilated across the whole spectrum. Be it communications, intelligence, logistics, economics, thus becoming a space power is a logical extension of concept of national power. We need plethora of space-based assets, including related to ground infrastructure, and that too very fast. This is going to be a teamwork wherein we need to take initiative, innovative, perform and provide capabilities. As we know, space is being fiercely contested. Hence, the opportunities to work here are great. Thanks to the opening of the space for private entities, it has generated a new interest among the private firms and startups, and we are also taking proactive steps to interact with them. And thanks to ISPA, who is enabling us in including to interact with these entities. And also, the InSpace, which has recently inaugurated, will also propel us in this direction. Space enables our national security to preserve our way of life. As the geopolitical landscape shifts, the advances in technology and new threats, space will continue to remain a critical component of a way of life and in turn our national security. The space is of vital interest to our national security. Our adversaries, as we know, are developing, testing, and deploying counter space capabilities. Therefore, we need to seek and deny their unfettered access to space and delay our freedom to operate in space. Purposeful or harmful interference should be appropriately responded to protect our national interest, to ensure that there is never a day without space. We need space for our future generations and we owe it to them. The integration of space across all spectrums is essential to provide the nation with an agile, potent deterrence. We look forward to space systems to connect, warn, guide, and inform decisions across the entire spectrum of conflict from space to the last tactical mile. I am sanguine that this seminar will definitely provide a fertile ground to deliberate on pertinent and live issues on space. I am sure that galaxy of eminent speakers who are around and the bright stars in the audience will provide an enhanced synergy amongst all the stakeholders, and some notable actions will emerge. I once again take this opportunity to thank ISPA for having organized this seminar and also compliment all the speakers who are going to participate in subsequent session. I think before I conclude, now let me give space to others to talk on space. Thank you, Jai Hind, and Godspeed.
Thank you, Marshal Krishna. And I would not like to summarize what he had said, but yes, certain words: contested and congested space, and hence the importance of space situation awareness. Space being coupled with the ground forces, with the ground warfare, and hence a very important necessity of asset protection. And lessons from the Ukraine conflict, with 50 satellites providing SAR and communication at the moment. A new geopolitics of space has to come, and we have to look at the future where space warfare, which is now the fourth dimension of war. I move on to our next speaker, Lieutenant General M.U. Nair, Ati Vasist Seva Medal, Sena Medal, presently the Commandant of MCTE. He'll speak to us on leadership in AI algorithms warfare. A complicated topic, and I'm looking forward to listen and learn a lot from him. General Nair heads the premier technical institution of the Indian Army, that is the Military College of Telecommunication and Engineering at MAU. He has, his last appointment before this was Additional Director General Signal Intelligence and the Chief of Staff of a Corps in the Northeast. He has a rich experience in the domains of cyber warfare, military operations, signal intelligence, and information technology. We look forward to his enlightening us in this topic. Over to you, General Nair.
CISC, DG ISPA, the fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. And it's a wonderful feeling coming back to this particular event, that is a GeoInt 2022. I've been part of it for a long time. About 2016 I attended, and I've been frequently called for the attendance on this. But the first time, like General Bhatt had mentioned, that the ISPA is organizing a space track as part of this GeoInt the GeoInt seminars. I think it's a wonderful measure. And I actually have been part of this the entire technology drive from 2003 onwards. when I started studying the northern borders, and that's the time when our northern adversary actually started getting into the informationalized domain. Since then, I have been in this field. I've been part of Military Operations Directorate, been steering ISR or space-based communication. So many things I've been driving. I got into a new field of cyber and was involved in the process of raising the Defense Cyber Agency as also the Defense Space Agency. This is from the period from 2015, 16, 17. I took on the mantle of the technical intelligence head, that is the ADG SI, for 2 years. Then I moved on to some operational assignments in Northeast and in Central Command. Now here I'm heading a small institution, which is actually a technology front end of communications, ICT, electromagnetic spectrum, everything, called the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering at Mao. Now I have this task of actually speaking to you on the AI, the use of AI in technology, especially focused at space. It is a tall order because we all talk about artificial intelligence today. In fact, everybody, including right from military specialists to so many people, are talking about artificial intelligence and how to use it. Even lawyers are using artificial intelligence for for deriving the best legal recourse to things. So, how are we going to use this artificial intelligence to derive benefits from whatever the previous speakers, that the CISC and DG ISPA had mentioned? Now, I'll just give you an example of the enormity of the task which I faced in the technology domain. We used to get about 1.5 lakh inputs in technology domain every day. Now, 1.5 lakhs could be, inputs could be in audio form, video form, multiple formats, text, everything. Now, how do you actually translate this 1.5 lakh inputs into valuable intelligence or something which is int-worthy, which we can actually respond to, or it could be for anything, for operational informations. It could be on fighting militancy, all this. Now, how do you transfer this 1.5 lakhs inputs is a major challenge which we faced. It was a human interface which was actually converting this 1.5 lakh inputs a day into intelligence. Now, is that the ideal method? No. So we started projects. You started using artificial intelligence tools. The work is still on. Now, the challenge is many of you may not understand the enormity of the problem, because the inputs which are coming are in multiple formats. They could be as coming in as tones for us. So we need to demodulate it. It could be in an encrypted form. So we need to decrypt it. And it could be in multiple formats with a lot of noise. So this was a major challenge which we face. So very honestly, to convert that 1.5 lakh inputs into about 100 int-worthy or the 100 inputs which are of value to us was the biggest challenge which we faced. We still haven't found a solution to it. Now, I looked at the current conflict which is going on between Ukraine and Russia. Now, there are AI tools which are converting ISR inputs into intelligence. But, they have, it may not be as complex as we have. We have inputs which are coming in multiple languages. Now, translation was a major challenge for us. Now, if you give one input which came to us and give it to translators, I used to get 5 different translations of it. Now, how do you judge it? Now, you might see that the Google can translate it very easily, but it doesn't happen. Now, because they are all on the military domain and the translations were not appropriate. So, how do you do it? So, these were the type of challenges which we face. So, what we did in MCT is that we started a small AI lab there, artificial intelligence lab. So we have started getting the inputs from multiple places. We have started interacting with the industry, interacting with the academia. So we have started trying to use the inputs which are coming to us at this point of time. The challenge which we face again is that the inputs, we are not ready to share the inputs, very, very freely. Like if I want an IMIN to come to me, the success of an artificial intelligence tool is based on the data sets which you get. Now, we are all not ready to share the data sets. This is a major challenge which we face. So we infuse some enthusiasm by, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Mao. It is a place where we have 3 premier institutions of the army, that is the Army War College, the Infantry School, and the MCT. So with so many officers, so much of talent there, we could actually infuse a lot of enthusiasm into them and then started getting the samples from them. So this AI lab is now working with the formations which are along the northern borders. We're getting inputs through the surveillance devices which we have. So many of them, many of them are analog equipment which are of yesteryears. We have modern tools. We have space-based tools which are coming. the inputs are coming to us, and we are trying to have algorithms built there, made there in-house, developed by our own expertise. We have a lot of talent pool in the armed forces, in fact. Since I worked in the tri-services domain, I forgot to mention to you that I worked for 4 years in IDS as part of CIS's outfit, first in the ops branch and then in the int branch. So a lot of familiar faces here who worked with me at that point of time, especially from the other services. So it was a good knowledge for me at that point of time. So I got all these inputs together and started working made a nucleus of a team which started getting the inputs. The challenge again which I face is that many of the inputs which are coming, especially from the other services, are in multiple formats where we don't have the expertise of that particular image. Like if you get a image from, say, the Air Force, it's an imagery where our army people don't have the expertise. So we wanted some Air Force assistance for that, converting that image into something. So the work is in progress at this point of time. But what I'm mentioning is that today, the field of AI algorithms, we have adequate talent, but we can't move ahead without the support of the industry and the academia. So I've reached out to, we have small setups which are functioning. We have technology hubs which have been developed in Chennai, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad. So, and right across Mau, we have IIT Indore, which is there. So we are interacting with all of them, we get stuck at certain points of time. So we interact with them, get that knowledge. That's what we are doing at this point of time. Now, coming on to the space domain. Now, it's a domain full of challenges and opportunities. Now, the inputs which are coming from the space domain are, it could be along our coastal plains. We have 7,500 kilometers of coastline. It could be an aircraft which is giving us inputs. It could be a satellite imagery of the seas, the oceans. Now, I'm sure the naval officers here would it's a major challenge which we get on how do you use AI algorithms for finding out potent targets or the small teams which are operating small boats carrying, which are hostile to our interests. Now, how do you identify them? Now, we require samples for it. Now, how do you find samples? Now, look at our island territories today. Now, we require a lot of data sets of what is coming, what are the assets which are moving in that area and the waters there. So that is the kind of inputs we are looking for. A lot of work is happening, and we have been able to we had the privilege of having all the 3 chiefs visiting the MCT. So we are trying to get the knowledge there in MCT, have this algorithms developed, and then trying to find solutions. But without the interface of the media, the academia and the industry, I think it's going to be a tall order for us. Some specific points which I wanted to discuss was on data storage. Now, we have, one of the major reasons why we are unable to get data is because of poor connectivity. Now, we talk about connectivity for the armed forces. Now, or northern borders, western borders, especially those areas where the sensors are located, don't have that kind of public networks today. So it's a major problem getting the data from the borders to us. We have military networks, army, service-specific networks which are there, which actually contribute to a lot to getting this information. But there are inadequacies in these networks also today. But we are actually in the process of rolling out a network for spectrum called Project Kranti, which should be fielded very shortly and which will enable all the information flow in a seamless manner to come to wherever the data is supposed to be stored. Now, the analysis of the data, it's another challenge. They come in multiple formats, as I had mentioned. Now, who carries out the study, the analytics of it? So we have now incorporated data science graduates. We are in the process of making structured data, unstructured data, getting them together, analyzing it. That is another work in progress at this point of time. The Ukraine-Russia conflict. Today it's the 112th day. There are AI algorithms which are involved in small facets of military operations too, like object detection, face detection. These are all small things, but they're also using it for small humane considerations. Like they are also using the AI algorithms for finding out corpses. Now, how do you find out a corpse and identify him with how do you inform the next of kin that, your ward has passed away or something. So this is also one of the means by which the AI algorithms are used today. I also wanted to mentioned that one of the major concerns we have is that when you're using large data sets like this, it compromises on your personal security and privacy. It's an issue which we need to consider. While we talk about, I'm sure you're all aware of whatever is happening in the environment today, where privacy concerns are a major issue. Now, can you compromise on individual soldiers, sailors, airmen's individual information, data? So that is another aspect which we need to consider while we are looking at algorithms. We need to have own networks and information systems which are independent of the public networks and digital domain, so that a nation's sovereignty and soldiers' personal security and privacy are not compromised. It's a tall order, considering the fact that digitization is a path of progress for future. So what do we need to do? We need to have robust networks which are secure and can withstand the vagaries of warfare. They need to be terrestrial, they need to be radiating, they need to be space-based. We require analytical tools which can offer you customized solutions based on existing data and problem statements given by users. Now, the users need to actually tell us the problem statements. How do you solve a problem? First, you need to know the problem itself. These are some of the challenges which we are facing. A dynamic policy framework which can adapt itself to the transformational changes which are taking place in the electromagnetic spectrum and ICT domain. This is a major issue which we are at this point of time grappling with. Increased threshold and involvement of users through a continuous engagement between the military, the industry, and the academia in such forums. This is another aspect which you need to consider. Now, for all of us who grew up, at least the older generation who grew up with the Star Wars, Star Trek, etc., the space is the final frontier. But I think we need to go beyond that. Today, space is definitely one of the major sources of information for us. It can be utilized in a multiple way. It still retains its prominency. Now, challenges in space-based surveillance, space-based in-gathering, and space-based guidance are all enigmas for which we need solutions. Can we, in our country, develop some capabilities in-house? That's a challenge which I think I throw open to each one of you here. Can we go beyond the current capabilities and look at future with non-kinetic ways of neutralizing space-based assets? Can we look at space-based manned, unmanned platforms carrying out surveillance and monitoring? Can we look at standoff space-based electronic warfare capabilities? I think this is where the ISPA can definitely help us in finding solutions. I have a few issues which I just thought I'll just throw it up onto the audience again. I mentioned about the information overload. 1.5 lakhs inputs, this I'm talking about 3 years back. I'm sure with the current capabilities, it will be much more. Now, the industry sees all opportunities, as with commercial interests. I think we need to change that approach. It should be a one nation approach where the industry needs to be hand-holding. In fact, having the military alongside. Purely looking at commercial interests may not probably, we will not be able to find solutions together for problem solving. This partnership has to be of prolonged duration. Now, challenge in the military is that, we have a problem of continuity. We have people who keep changing frequently. It's a HR management challenge. While the Navy and the Air Force have HR management policies which are aligned to probably the requirements, but the Army has a problem there. We need to keep moving after 2-3 years, etc., etc. It's a major challenge which we face. The knowledge threshold. Now, many of us, especially at the decision makers making levels, have very limited knowledge of technology. So they need to have domain experts associated with them to provide them with the competence. So this is another challenge. The technology experts are disconnected with the operational issues. This is another major challenge which we face. Can we have AI going down to field formations in the Army? I actually don't think so. I think we should focus AI, algorithm building, etc. at niche areas. Such niche areas of technology should be limited at the highest levels where institutions organizationally can actually work finding solutions. Now, can you look at a formation like a brigade or an infantry battalion looking at AI solutions? I think we should not get into these domains. Now, also understand that not every industry, not every startup has the capability in this domain. So that also we need to factor in while we are taking decisions. I also wish that the Indian Space Association associates itself with a directorate, the IDS, or any of the directorates to take this endeavor forward. If they don't get associated with a directorate, then there will be gaps which come up in our capability building exercise. These are some of the points I just thought I will throw it open. I'm sure this will emerge in the discussions that follow. Extremely grateful to DG ISPA for inviting me over. It's been wonderful audience. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Nair, for your views and for coming all the way from Mau to talk on this subject, which is very close to your heart. And as I see it, and a very important thing in your entire talk was interaction between academia, industry, and the armed forces. And that is one very important thing today this space track wants to carry and take forward. You've also spoken about the challenges and opportunities in space. And for the industry, one very important challenge is the return on investments would take a very long time. And hence, a long-term engagement and a commitment from the armed forces is very critical. Thank you, you have highlighted that. As far as association with space, with the directorates here, the fact that you are there, the CISC is there, AVM Ranade and the DG of DSA, all I hear, speaks of the kind of association we are looking forward to having with you and with the industry that we think take things forward. Thank you, General Nair. And I now go to the next speaker, Air Vice Marshal M. Ranade, AVSM, VM. He's the ACS of Space, and he would be speaking about Indian Air Force and the space domain. Little of it has been started and spoken yesterday by the Air Chief himself, and he will go into more into the details of it. Air Marshal Ranade is an alumnus of National Defence College and was commissioned in the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force on 6 December 86, sorry. He is in more than 2,500 hours of flying. He's as a fighter combat leader. He has done his Air Staff College at Paris and is also an alumnus of NDC. He's commanded 2 fighter bases, an advanced headquarter, and a MiG-21 squadron. And he has been a chief operation officer of a fighter base. He's also represented the country as an air attaché in the embassy in Kabul in Afghanistan. He has tenated the appointment of the principal director of Directorate of Air Staff Inspections and Director Personnel Officers, both very important directorates in the Air Headquarters. Without much ado, I now hand over to you for your part of this.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a proud privilege for me to participate in this edition of Geointelligence Conference cum Exhibition. Unlike other aspects of national security, for which we see numerous seminars, symposiums, conferences being held on a regular basis, there have been relatively fewer events focusing on the space domain and its importance for national security. This conference is significant as it brings together civilian and military users, academia and industry on a single platform. I'm sure as the day progresses, we will find a lot of gain coming to us in terms of knowledge enhancement. The use of space, or more appropriately, use of space-based systems and technologies has become an inherent part of our lives to such an extent that we often forget the level of its pervasiveness. General Nair did mention a bit about it in his talk. Space-based products and services have permeated every facet of our life, at home, in industry and commerce, governance, science and technology, art and culture, agriculture, law and order, disaster management, so on and so forth. Similarly, we are seeing the space domain increasingly occupying greater space in the security calculus of a large number of nations. Space security construct is therefore a high priority area that needs our sustained, focused attention. For tomorrow's war, or rather, it is today's war as we see happening in Ukraine, we are increasingly talking about multi domain operations, MDO, which integrate land, maritime, air, space, and cyber operations. And mind you, IT, cyber, as also the three armed forces, three services, rely heavily on space technologies since they offer a privileged position advantage to the users. I'm sure we all recognize that despite extended technology transfer bans, our country has made commendable progress in exploiting space technologies, especially for civilian use. On most occasions, we don't openly associate with ISRO primarily to avoid sanctions, as was abundantly covered earlier. However, in spite of that, the advancements made have been significant, and the support provided by the government has been a major contributory factor in this. The military use of space, perhaps after a late start, has seen rapid growth, and the recent opening up of private sector for space has brought in renewed energy and excitement. So with this as the backdrop, let's look at the IF and the space domain. As stated by the Chief of Air Staff during the inaugural address of this event yesterday, IF operations are closely linked to the space domain. Activities through the medium of air and space are part of the same continuum and can never be separated and conducted in isolation. IF has invariably aligned its operational priorities, keeping the space domain in focus with due attention to the advancements made in the technologies concerned. Currently, IF is utilizing the space domain for multiple activities, significant among them being satellite communication, position, navigation, timing, that is PNT, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, that is ISR. Let's look at each one of them in a bit of a detail. IF's use of satellites for communication commenced in the late 90s, wherein beyond line of sight communication was enabled through the use of SATCOM by hiring services from the INSAT series of satellites. In the early years of this century, I have set up dedicated SATCOM network to function as a backup for the optical fiber communication network. These networks have been utilizing the bandwidth of the available satellites. However, over time we realized that this is not adequate. During the past decade, airborne sensors like AWACS and AEWC have also been using space-based resources for beyond line of sight communications. Considering the increase in demand for bandwidth and the requirement of sharing near real-time information by airborne sensors with the ground-based agencies, a dedicated IF satellite, that is GSAT-7A, became operational in year 2019. Just last year, the Government of India has given a go-ahead for another dedicated satellite for enabling beyond line of sight communications with the airborne elements. With regard to PNT, IF has been utilizing the services of GPS and GLONASS for a considerable period of time. With the operationalization of navigation with Indian constellation, that is NAVIC for short, the IF is actively pursuing implementation of the NAVIC restricted services to prevent spoofing and associated activities in its assets for satellite-based PNT. Towards ISR, the IF has been utilizing satellite-based images for planning air operations and to enhance situational awareness. It is envisaged that submetric resolution of objects on ground by the ISR satellites on a near real-time basis, if not in real time, will be the way forward. In terms of safety of life applications, IF has already equipped its airborne platforms with space-based search and rescue services. Space-based weather data is being collected, collated, and in near real-time weather information or forecast is being disseminated for operations. All the platforms and systems being inducted in IF do have the capability to exploit the services rendered through the medium of space. Such a capability makes our systems unmatched, thereby providing us an operational edge. In future, I have intends to delve into various avenues through constant deliberations with Defense Space Agency and experts from the academia, R&D establishments and the industry. Integration of dual-use capabilities for exploitation by civil and military players in space-based assets will enable redundancies against any act directed towards denial of space resources. There are a few focus areas when I talk about this aspect. What are the notable ones? These are interoperability with military platforms and inclusion of security architecture for specific military use, seamless integration and capability to switch over from one resource to other in a denied environment, incorporation of advanced encryption systems to enable specific military use and to get activated on demand, redundancies in space and ready to launch systems on ground, develop capability for quick launch of space based assets in case of any contingency. The aspect of low Earth orbit, launch on demand have adequately been touched upon, and so therefore I will not go too much into detail on this count. Another interesting aspect of military space systems and technologies is that they are inherently joint capability assets. Barring a few service specific applications, space assets, be it NAVIC, GSAT communication satellite, or IMINT or SIGINT satellite, all have utility for the three services. Why I am saying this is to highlight the importance of joint data collection and analysis, and even more importantly, the need for a fast and dynamic data distribution setup to meet the requirements of each service and other users as well. Of course, this point has already been touched upon by my previous speakers. However, this is one area where we need to do some quality weightlifting, and that too very, very quickly. Development of space capabilities and especially the military space capabilities requires a long gestation period. While we need to plan for optimal utilization of the assets, to expect quick results every time would be our greatest folly. We tend to become impatient because the results don't show, unlike in some other areas, for example, cyber, where the results are immediately seen in front of us. Patience is the key word here. Therefore, there is a need for a long-term action plan for enabling newer space capabilities. Security of these precious assets would be, of course, a prime focus area for all of us. Resilience and restitution of space-based assets are important aspects that would prove to be of crucial significance going forward. Given the rapid growth of space-based military capabilities in our neighborhood, we need to develop indigenous capabilities, especially towards better space situational awareness. This could be one of the achievable goals in the near to the midterm. India has already started space security dialogues with some countries, and I'm sure such efforts would only help us to enhance the space situational network, leading to a better SSA. IF is keen to explore the potential available in the field of space exploration and exploitation through DSA. Mutual cooperation and synergy between the three services will enable optimum gains from the available resources. We need to build bench strength and make sure that we retain the skilled personnel and develop them into top-notch professionals. To catch up with other space-capable nations, we need to encourage the domestic space industry, educational and research institutes for gearing up to the rapidly changing technology and requirements in this field. In the end, I can only reiterate that space would play an increasingly critical role in any future operation. Even during peacetime, space technologies would form an important element of our comprehensive national power. Given its importance, there will be increased geopolitical power plays as nations compete to own or control a greater proportion of the space pie. It is incredible how quickly the space domain, whose vastness used to amaze us just a few decades ago, has already got overcrowded today. Finally, I am grateful to the organizers for providing me this platform to express views on behalf of the Indian Air Force. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Marshal Ranade. And I would be very brief because the timekeeper is warning me that we are going far ahead of in our time plan. Most importantly, aspect which he brought out, that space now is being touching all parts of our life. It's only 1 year back I realized, from my ATM to my weather to my movement in the morning, everything, there is a space dimension to it. And more of it is coming, and that is why it has become dual use. And that is where, in the last war, in the war which is going on, you would see most of Starlink and Maxar's capabilities. There's no defining line between the civil usage or the military usage of it. And that will give a challenge to our assets as they come. Most importantly for the IF, one, their SAT communication presently is on the geosynchronous. Maybe they will have to look at the Leo constellation in the future. And I'm very happy, and that has to happen, that PNT would slowly move from the American-based GPS to the Indian NAVIC as it is emerging up. Now I bring forward the next speaker, Air Vice Marshal D.V. Khote, AVSM, DG DSA. He is the, in fact, person which many of my friends in industry have been looking to meet him, because he is supposed to be the single point of all contacts on all matters of space. We are so proud in India that the armed forces took one initiative, rightly so, a little late, but still better than many other countries, was when the DSA concept of creating the Defence Space Agency took place in 2017 and 18. And this month, they are 3 years old. There's a lot of work they have to do to synergize the efforts of all the three forces, work out what would be the space vision for the armed forces in the future, and how that can be optimized by the help of course, ISRO, DRDO, and the industry. I would very briefly introduce you to the speaker. Air Marshal Dhananjay got commissioned into the Air Force on 11th June 88. He is a Cat 1 qualified flying instructor and has about 3,000 hours of flying under his belt. He was selected as the instructor for training in the US, where he got a top grading, and he was the first IF pilot there who was to be selected as a flying instructor with the United States Air Force. Over to you, Air Vice Marshal Khote.
Air Marshal Krishna, Chief of the Integrated Defence Staff, General Nair, General Bhatt, General Chandali of Geospatial World, co-panelists, members of the audience, a very good morning to everybody from the Defence Space Agency. It's a privilege to be here in this edition of this conference, an important conference. And as the name suggests, my topic involves the emerging paradigm in space warfighting. There are two presuppositions embedded in the title itself. First, that there is some warfighting that may be happening or is expected to be happening, perhaps, in the days to come. And the second is that something is changing, and therefore there are emerging models and emerging understanding, emerging paradigms. Both are actually true. So my scope for the coming 10 minutes, I'll just talk a little bit about the emerging trends in warfare, since we are talking about emerging paradigms, a little bit about the emerging trends in space as well. And then we'll come to the core and the kernel of this particular conference, which is geospatial intelligence. and its role in warfighting as we see it happening in front of us before we conclude. Let me come to the emerging trends in warfare. From the very stable paradigm during the Cold War of a bipolar world, two blocks, and yes, there was a third kind of non-aligned bloc, but it leaned one way, but had the privilege of seeking neutrality when required. From there, we have, over the last 30 odd years, shifted to a multipolar world, but that itself has been kind of unstable. It's a confusing world that we live in. At one point, it appeared that the European Union would constitute a particular bloc, particularly after the Soviet Union broke up and the Eastern Bloc kind of collapsed. But then there was Brexit. And that bloc is no longer looking the way it did 10 years ago. So there are shifting blocs, shifting alliances, even in the current Ukraine conflict. You see that the alignments have shifted during the course leading to that war and just after. The second important thing is non-state actors. And that's another confusing element that has come into how warfighting is changing. So it begs the question, what is the threat perception on which one is to base one's strategy? Classically, in military thought, we think of strategy as force preparation, force deployment, force employment. How is one to prepare the force? How is one to actually prepare a strategy when the threat perception itself is so fluid? That's one part. Collaborations and alliances are an important part. That also is changing. The second important point I'd like to come to is the change in the nature of warfare from the conventional zones, which continues to have its own space, which continues to exist. But the transition to grey zone and hybrid warfares, which means multi-domain, no longer restricted to armed conflict, but also spreading into other areas. What that has brought to us is these blurred lines between the friend and the neutral and the foe. You don't know who is who. Some conventional warfare spreading into multi-mode warfare. For example, just to highlight one area is information domain. We all live embedded in the information world. And that today is a domain of warfare. And there is active warfare going on through the information domain. Social media is one instrument of that. So multi-domain with intrinsic deniability in a number of different cases. So you don't know who's doing what is happening. There are a number of non-lethal means, but very lethal effects. If someone was to today disrupt, and I believe experiments have been carried out by one of our adversaries within India itself, if one was to disrupt your normal life by interfering with such things as the electricity grid, the transportation networks, even normal civil life, by embedding of rumors and causing a certain amount of movement of people, all of these are non-lethal means, but could have extreme effects. What this means is that both the warfighter and the target are no longer restricted to the military domain. So let me break it gently to all the people who are sitting in civis. Whether you like it or not, all of you are targets, and all of us, are warfighters in the grey zone. And it's not up to us to decide whether or not we'd like to participate. You participate willy-nilly. Our choices are only how we do the fight. Let me come to space warfare. From the Gulf War, the first Gulf War onwards, it's been very clear that solutions or what happens on the ground, results, consequences on the ground would be decided aloft in the aerospace domain. And it was very clear that space is the ideal instrument for domination. And this was true particularly when the number of spacefaring nations was small. And these very niche technologies were held by a few, and that helped them to dominate the narrative on the ground. What is changing that? The entry of commerce into the field. And now we are seeing the entry of commerce at a rate which is starting to dominate the total military presence in the air, in the sky. The total number of satellites that are in the sky today have more civilian satellites than those launched for military purposes alone. However, that would be simplifying, the facts there, because the majority of them utilize dual-use technologies. Other than the few instruments which are directly used to attack or damage somebody's assets on the ground or in the air. Everything else is intrinsically dual use, which again gives, takes us to ambiguity. Once again, the gray zone. Once again, the confusion. Dual use technologies, dual use platforms, dual use services can be used by the civilian world, by trade and commerce, and also by the military. Cyber tools are the weapons of choice riding on space-based vehicles. Warfare today is already kind of an established thing when it can take place through space, which means your intercontinental ballistic missiles, etc., or enabled through space. But also from space becoming a possibility, and in space. Currently barred by law, but still very much a possibility. So that brings us to a few very pertinent points. Space is already militarized and has been for the last 50 years. What about weaponization? It appears that the world is moving towards that. It's very clear that space enables your hybrid and gray zone warfare very well because of the distributed services. For example, the Starlink network is going to bring low latency, which means high-speed internet global communications to anybody who was denied it so far because of reasons of terrain or because of being far away from cities and for lack of communication networks. So it's going to be, the global internet service is going to be available even in the narrowest valleys, in the furthest areas in the world. What is it doing? This distributed power to anybody and everybody is actually bringing us to the point where gray zone warfare can be enabled anywhere. The penetration of commercial space services in every aspect of our life is increasing our dependencies on what is traveling on space or space-borne vehicles. Your transportation systems, your irrigation, electricity grids, the internet, that IoT, Internet of Things, is riding on space. So your televisions, your computers, and every other appliance which is today going to be riding on IoT, all of it through space. If that is disrupted, your normal life, the life of every common citizen gets disrupted. And entire populations can be affected through this. In space, there are certain transformational technologies. The list is not comprehensive. The list is debatable. But there are a few technologies which I consider kind of important. Number one, what is taking place in the communications domain is a revolution. Low Earth orbit communication constellations, giving you low latency global internet communications all over the world and available to everybody. The speed at which the Starlink constellation was operationalized over Ukraine is a lesson. And it was intended to beef up Ukraine's ability to resist. Very high resolution EO and SAR imagery across these things, multispectral, PAN, hyperspectral, and so on and so forth, and radar imagery is bringing a level of battlefield transparency never before experienced. So we might as well, the warfighters, get used to it, that everything that we do likely to be seen. There are multiple GNSS options today, which gives a level of redundancy never experienced. So you could jam or spoof one, but the system has the ability to fall back on another one. So today there is your GPS, there is the GLONASS, there is the Baidu. Now Navic coming up, there could be more in the future. So the same technology that's going to make sure that your Ola driver knows where to go is also going to guide the missile to the target, possibly in the face of jamming and spoofing. Rendezvous and proximity operations. Apparently, there was a particular country which recently brought its satellite within a few meters of another satellite for close observation. China recently demonstrated the ability with robotic arm and grapplers, where it actually grappled with one of its own satellites, and took it to another place in space. Revolutionary possibilities. The penetration of the cyber world and the information world through SATCOM into everyday life is another technology with disruptive possibilities. There's a couple of other points there, which is one is data analytics. Through all of these various instruments that are being placed in space and the associated equipment on the ground, massive amounts of data is being collected and gathered, and therefore data analytics becomes a very, very important part of what is required to be done. Because that is where a number of different things that are hidden in the data are going to come out. AI/ML, extremely important, already mentioned by General Nair. Automation and decision support are areas because saturation with the amount of information flows that is going to happen. Very, very easy to saturate the higher levels with data. Unless we are able to automate and process huge volumes of data in a short amount of time to extract what is relevant to the warfighting decision-making machinery, we are going to saturate ourselves and paralyze ourselves. Therefore, AI and ML and our ability to use it in as many applications as possible in future. Once again, that very important thing of several of these, for example, data analytics, for example, AI, ML, and so many other enabling technologies I will touch upon, are all dual use, which means it does not require the military industrial, complex, for want of a better word, to develop it. And therefore, we need to be embedded in a larger civil military fused environment where academia, industry, startups, scientists, and military people all come together and are able to develop some of these things further. Coming to GeoInt part in warfighting, geospatial intelligence, very important part of the matrix of various kinds of intelligence information, which would be SIGINT, measurements and signature intelligence, open source, very big today. And actually it reveals a lot, HUMINT. So it's part of that matrix. Now this is a multi-domain, multi-platform matrix because your sensors could be based in space, on aircraft, UAVs, ships, terrestrial, or through humans. ISR is what basically GeoInt gives us. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Main aim is to inform the decision-making process at a speed matching that of operations. That's a big ask. And what is it that GeoInt is bringing to the table as far as ISR is concerned? Today, in terms of pure technologies or abilities, there is the very high resolution electro-optical set of instruments and sensors, hyperspectrals, multispectrals, infrared. Radar sensing is becoming a little more important because the radar satellite doesn't sleep, is equally effective at day and night, and can penetrate weather and haze. Therefore, what is not possible, in fact, the Ukraine war is another example where the country is largely under cloud cover for most of the year. And they found that electro-optical satellites are not as effective for gathering intelligence. And therefore, suddenly there was this big cry for radar sensors and SAR imagery from the Ukrainians for intelligence. The ability to sense the environment and weather and predict. That's basically, characterizing the environment itself in which we have to operate as military as well as civilians. Most importantly, detecting, locating, tracking, and therefore fixing what you need to hit. Those are the key abilities that we require in the military, and it's enabled through space probably better than any other medium. So the given is battlefield transparency and shortened sensor to shooter loop. These are the two things that we look for as military people from space. Obviously, the enemy also looks for the same thing. So part of the story is to how to deny that to him. Some enabling technologies. And here is where we're looking to the industry and to academia to give us some of these solutions in the times to come. Multi-sensor data fusion. There is electro-optical imagery that you get visually, intuitive, something that you can see and interpret at a glance, the most easy in terms of human ability. Radar sensing, a little bit more. It gives you additional data and a different data. Add to that electronic intelligence. And now you have a gathering of sensors and inputs which actually, if fused together in a single package, in a single product, will give you the best springboard for decision making. To achieve this, AI and ML in automation as well as in decision support, these are two different things. Automation is basically for the churning of the large volumes of data, and the higher order thinking comes from the decision support. Again, that's a big ask and not very easy. Eventually, what we're looking for is an effective and seamless teaming of the man-machine. Man and machine have to come together. The human mind is to be freed from the clutter and the pressure of crunching large amounts of data so that the intrinsic human genius is freed to apply judgment and to make decisions. That's where we need help from machines, and that's where we need help from industry. So what is the way ahead? is not merely individual technologies that need to be advanced, but our ability to design all of them, weave all of them into into a coherent solution package. And truly advanced thinkers and truly advanced economies are heading this way. The ability to weave disparate technologies into a congruent whole. Most importantly, we need a very coherent policy matrix. Purpose, the 3 Ps, purpose, policy, procedure. All of these they need to be fused into one instrument so that they're not opposing each other, but actually supporting each other. And finally, our ability, and this is again all of the country, all of us, not merely the military, but also within industry, within academia, within every other element of government and society, our ability to absorb technology in an agile manner, which requires us to learn, unlearn, relearn, and keep doing this process over and over and over again. Our ability to put behind what we have mastered, because there is something else that needs to be mastered. That in brief, ladies and gentlemen, was the crux I wanted to put forward to all of you. And once again, very grateful, sir, for the invitation. Privileged to be here. Thank you so very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, AVM Court. And more importantly, the grey zone, the dual technology, and the need for civil-military fusion is a very important aspect he's brought out. Rendezvous proximity ops, which will be a challenge in space, and the robotic arms, which have been created by China also, are areas of concern. And in his way ahead, he talks of policy. And the positive factor is that we are expecting the space policy to come maybe by the end of this month, if not in early July. And the space activity bill we are promised, interactions on that will start in another 2 months. And by the end of this year, the Department of Space aims to bring out the space activity bill also. I now take you to the industry members of today's event today, and they are both, in a way, startups. I'll first start with Mr. Kranti Chand, who in fact brings down the average age of this panel significantly. He is a national award-winning space technology startup which is focused on building full-stack space engineering solutions. The company is based in Hyderabad and also in Graz, Austria. They are actively involved in building applications, agnostic satellite platforms. Dhruva Space, which is the name of his company, offers satellites coupled with earth stations and launch services as an integrated solution, or individually as technology solution to power-based applications in earth and beyond. Today he'll speak to us on technology trends in space and overview. Over to you, Kranti.
Thank you, sir. It's an extreme pleasure to be here on stage. I think I've interacted with most of the General Nair here and AVM Ranade here. And it's been an honor because I think, as General Butt said, the face of Indian space ecosystem is changing. And the new policy initiatives and the new measures and the platform that is made for the private participation in the space activities is ushering a new revolution in terms of what we can do for the defense. And I think as industry, we look forward to supporting the Indian Defense Forces in actually reaching the space much faster and using that for your tactical purposes. I think just wanted to break it down. I think we have a great amount of my industry colleagues here. Rohan is here. Kshitij is here from Pixel. Colonel Sai was here a little while ago from Maxar. I think the idea of and user perspective for a lot of solutions from the defense is that we look at very perspectively from the ISR in most cases, or the communication, which is the end user centric. I think end user centric, Rohan and others will be more pertinent to talk about the technologies, but I think I would like to concentrate on the upstream segment. So when we talk about upstream, it's the satellite building, launching of the satellite, setting up of the ground infrastructure to receive the data. The data, once accumulated, how it can be used becomes the crux. And most use cases that the defense looks at are those use cases which can drive them to take decision making. So we are trying to talk about what happens before the decision making availability, or the data to make the decisions, are available. So I think, as AVM Court had mentioned, the technologies are expanding. What we are seeing is that there is a need for formation flying of satellites, inter-satellite links, launch on demand, high data rate communications, persistent surveillance, because we've seen that our adversaries are taking up these capabilities. There are countries which are benefiting from these persistent monitoring of which is provided by the space assets. Now, how do we get there, right? At the end of the day, we want to have our own space assets. We want to be able to compete, contest, and actually take over our adversaries in terms of how we use these assets in our technical warfare. Before I dive into what stage we are in as startups and what is happening, just wanted to give a perspective from an international background. India as a country has about 55 space assets in orbit currently, and less than 20 of them which are supporting the Indian Defense Forces directly or indirectly. But when you look at the international market or the international context itself, the US has 1,500 space assets. China has about 500 space assets. Russia has 350 space assets. The number of assets that are available to generate that data set, the data set that General Nair has pointed out that needs to be crunched by our AI algorithms, the data set that will give us intelligence to take the next step in warfare. How are these countries building it much faster? And what will be our steps towards looking at it? And I think one of the things that is very crucial is how the private companies are participating in the satellite manufacturing activity and turning the tide in terms of the time that is required to manufacture a satellite, put a satellite in orbit, and how it is moving forward. A lot of technologies that we talk about, in terms of the previous ones that I mentioned, are hard to make. At the end of the day, in 50 years of independence, since we had the ISRO working out many missions and bringing glory to the country, some of these are still not there as capabilities in India. We don't have a formation flying satellites that are working for us, nor do we have inter-satellite links that are communicating between LEO satellites, nor do we have launch on demand. I think everyone is waiting for when we can launch the next satellite, GISAT or GSAT. The high data rate communications, we are still constricted. I think officers from the DIPAC know it better in terms of how data downlink rates are and what is our issues with it. And I think persistent surveillance with limited number of satellites is always a question. But how are our adversaries doing it? How are the other countries doing it? And how are these companies doing it? And I think one of the first steps towards realization of the transformation that Air Marshal Krishna had mentioned, about 60,000 satellites that are going into orbit, which means that they've tried, tested, and figured out the technologies that are going to be deployed in those numbers. So what happened in the last 10 years is that testing of the technology. Demonstration missions, which range from a CubeSat, which is less than a kilogram, all the way to satellites which weigh up to 6,000 kilograms in the low Earth orbit. We're not talking any longer about the geostationary orbit, large satellites, but in the low Earth orbits. So how did this revolution happen? I think a key factor to it is something called the CubeSats, which is the smallest form of a satellite, a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10 centimeters. It's a tiffin box, right? How it happened is that it was a technology that was developed in University of Stanford and California Polytechnic, and later took on by the founders or the professors in the university who started the company called Taiwac Systems started launching those satellites for the US defense, created those small satellites to test newer technologies. When we talk about newer technologies, it is technologies that are already developed on the terrestrial platform by the defense forces. DRDO has developed multiple sensors. The effort that these companies put in over the last 10 years is how can we take the terrestrial components into space and deliver those solutions. The faster is the realization time, the smaller is the effort to actually bring things into space, test it, fail at it, and rework on the next steps, and then keep increasing the platform sizes is what made it an revolution in terms of what can be developed. The other companies that you see on the screen are Blue Canyon Technologies, York Space, and Taiwac Systems. These are the companies which got the Space Development Agency contracts for 140 satellites. How are newer startups building these satellites, and how are these companies aiming to develop it is the technology edge that they brought in from miniaturization, small satellites, and taking that a leap with partnerships. And it is very crucial to understand the ecosystem also. Lockheed Martin backs Taiwac Systems, Raytheon backs BCT or purchased BCT outright 2 years ago. There's an integration that is happening and consolidation that is happening in the ecosystem where the technologies once proven are being overtaken by larger companies so that they can deliver bigger solution. The reason for a bigger solution is, as again, AVM Court mentioned, what we need to do is merge and create a weave together. What we've seen is that the satellite manufacturers or the system integrators are the key players who bring all the technologies together, which is bring in the payloads, bring in the mission design, everything together to ensure that the final solution that the defense forces requires is delivered. Rather than getting into the nitty-gritties of each and payload, what is the specification, what is the power requirement, how can we they've taken that approach where they've created those system integrators to lead the next generation of satellite missions. And a key one, I think also General Nair has mentioned, the fourth logo on the screen is the US Naval Academy, which has been launching its own satellites. The idea of the officers themselves building and launching satellites, which creates an understanding of what is the technology, how it is done, what are the limitations, and how can we actually define those problem statements so that they can be fast realized. I think that will be the crucial one in terms of understanding how it happened internationally and bringing those back into our country. Well, everyone is proud of what ISRO has done for the last 50 years and 115 satellites that had been launched, and what is the achievement in terms of turnaround time, in terms of building technology at a low cost, especially when it is related to space sciences or civilian purposes, has been phenomenal. Now is the time for the industry to take up the mantle and build on the achievements and the systems that have been developed by ISRO and build the next step. How do we build the next step? That's a key question that everyone is trying to solve, right? ISRO had built an ecosystem of about 400 to 800 MSMEs who had been supporting the program in terms of fabrication of different subsystems that are related to the satellites. Yes. Now, who is that one of those 400 who will step up and build us the full solution? Now, that's been the question, the million-dollar question. How can they step up? Because IP has always been with ISRO. The technology has been ideated, conceptualized, and been given as a part of ISRO. The only satellites we've replicated in numbers are our GSATs for communication, and rest of the satellites have always been customized solutions. So how do we actually replicate? How do we move from what ISRO had done, make that as a base, and turn around in terms of if there are going to be 60,000 satellites launched in the next 10 years, well, probably Indian government and Indians would look for at least getting 10% of those satellites to be owned by India. How do we actually make 6,000 satellites in the next 10 years when we made 115 satellites in the last 50 years? That's the question that we need to solve. And I think that is the step where we have to start. How do we bridge the gap between the industry and what are the steps that can be taken together to do things? The first step, I think, is being taken by different companies in the space startup segment. And I think it is very important and pertinent to see the difference, right? When we look at space, it's rocket science. That's simple. Every time we've been asked to do something at a corporate world, you say it's not a rocket science because you should be doing it. But now we are talking about actually rocket science and doing it much faster than anyone else. ISRO showed us the pathway in one way or the other. They had UR Rao Satellite Center where the satellite bus is manufactured. You had Space Application Center based out of Ahmedabad where the payloads are manufactured. The launch vehicles are manufactured at VSSC. So there was always an way where integrated efforts were made towards realizing of the space missions that our country had produced. We are proud of the space missions, which means that they've done right in terms of that integrated approach. I think the next step for us is how do we integrate startups and MSMEs to work together? Because all of us are not competing and we are working together. And that's something that I would like to bring it to this August audience, that we are not here to compete, but work together to deliver the solutions that you require. So I think that is the precursor to the conversations in terms of what we can do. I think launch systems, we have two different companies working on launch vehicles and others supporting in terms of the propulsion systems. Skyroot and Agnikul planning their first launches in Q1, Q2 next year, where in terms of the calendar year. We have satellite manufacturing that's happening at Satellites and Dhruva Space. General Butt has been working tirelessly in terms of getting the space policy ready. And I think that's going to be a crucial one for private institutions to launch satellites. It's still not permitted. So before you ask the question, how many satellites did private players launch? It's still zero. But I think that's a wave that we are ready to break through. We have ground communications that are being built by, again, multiple companies. So the idea is that each of these companies are building the niche technologies that together that need to be weaved towards facilitating that platform. We are only still talking about the platform, not the payload, not the final end result in terms of the data product, but the platform that needs to be set in place before everything else happens. The reason why we say, again, the platform is the most important one is if you look at the, again, comparison of what NASA has been doing, the first thing that they did before they started the small business innovation grants or other stuff is the Rapid Spacecraft Development Office. And its program is to actually ensure that there are satellite buses which are produced and the capabilities of those satellite buses are made public for anyone to integrate any payload onto it. So what happens is that we move away from the yesteryear approach of customized designs of satellites to fit the payloads to make payloads that fit satellites that can be mass manufactured. The mass manufacturing comes when there is limited deviation from your initial product and only deviations that are required for specific missions. So the idea is about creating that bus. Creating the chassis of every automobile is similar to the satellite platform that needs to be built so that this data should be made available so that we have more integration capabilities that will be made feasible for the payload manufacturers and the users. Well, there you go. I think the space solutions are the ones that are going to be looked at. And I think Kshitij is here from Pixel. There's Pixel, Zovian, Galaxy, which are building satellite constellations, whether it is signal intelligence, hyperspectral imagery, multi-sensor data sets, which are SAR plus optical imagery. and the applications which are, imagery analysis in terms of agriculture, civilian applications to defense object detection. I think there's a lot of activity that is going on in terms of how the companies are building those niche technologies and can stitch them together to find the final solution. It is all of the startups and MSMEs coming together that will deliver the solution rather than individually us delivering a full solution. On this segment, General Nair, I think you mentioned about how startups or companies need to come in and work together. I think one of the crucial element in terms of space activity, as we've seen, when Air Force purchased the satellite or, looked at the AON, 1,800 crores to 2,000 crores that is being spent on a satellite mission. It's true, right? At the end of the day, rocket science is costly. And every of us companies have raised about $100 million. 700 crores is being spent by the satellite companies or the startups in the space domain to actually build the initial first product. We're not talking about the 10th product, we are talking about the first product. There's a lot of money that goes into realization of these projects. And it is important that for this money to be put in, and I think General Butt had mentioned it very clearly, which is the investors want return on investment. The investors want to see what is the market that can be done. We would like to see that from the defense forces. I think the bifurcation of the Space Development Agency from the US Armed Forces created that clear outset that $24.5 billion is allocated to space activities per year. The word of how much is bifurcated from the Indian defense budget towards space activities will make a difference. Because today, when people look at it, everyone talks about only one number, which is the $2 billion that is spent by ISRO. It doesn't help the investors to come in because it's too small for them. There's not been enough technology transfer. In terms of us realizing a lot of systems, I think Make in India is a very big policy for us and including the defense forces. But sorry to say this, 55% of the raw material that is taken into the ISRO satellite itself is imported. We are not a country where we are at self-reliance level only because of the reason that we don't have mass manufacturing of satellites. The day we are able to mass manufacture or at least show that there will be scale for manufacturing or a requirement for so many satellites is when investment will flow. It is then we will see the reduction in the external content or imported content in our satellites. But it's crucial to understand that when each mission is done in India, our startups work tirelessly to bring in that mission planning. Kshitij can, again, in the afternoon session, talk about it more, about how building world's first and the highest resolution hyperspectral imaging satellite was possible. India is a country of plenty of opportunities. The startups and the talent are ready to deliver the solutions, but it needs that boost. And the reason why we keep saying it needs the boost is because defense is the primary buyer for space technology. And again, Maxar, which is the leader in terms of geospatial intelligence, in terms of imagery, 25% of their revenues come from a single contract from NRO. Now, that is the amount of dependence that companies have in running their business. $900 million of revenue of Maxar comes in, geospatial intelligence or imagery sales. And out of that, $400 million is a single contract value from NRO. Now, have we seen that level of buying from the defense forces from the private entities? How can we spur it? Because at the end of the day, for defense to buy, private industry also has to step up and provide the solutions. We are not saying that we can't, but it's a chicken and egg where we are not allowed to own satellites in this country. So we cannot provide you. So which means that you have to support us in building the satellites and launching them for you. And only then we will be able to scale it up. And I think the numbers are pretty much known. I think Antrix had supplied about 30 crore worth of imagery to Indian Defence Forces in the last financial year. Can a part of that be also awarded to, say, Pixel to provide their imagery in the country? Or for Dhruva to build a satellite and showcase that this is the feasibility? And I think those small measures are the things that the industry is looking at far beyond what is currently worked out. And I think it is easy to look at the efforts of other organizations. Surprisingly, non-DOS, non-MOD agencies have floated tenders for satellites, but the MOD hasn't. Neither has DOS. So, which agency will lead India's first satellites to be operated by the private players? How will it be done? I think is a mission that we are looking forward to see. But I think a request to the IDS is that there needs to be an overhaul of the procurement procedure in the defense, something that needs to move beyond the DAP. So the reason I say it is because this. A TDF grant, whether it is 10 crores or 50 crores for a product to be developed, compared to 100 crores that need to be the investment that it needs to be made into the product manufacturing, makes that many startups lose equity. They give away equity to the investors and bring in capital to make it feasible. The TDF only promises the first prototype. It doesn't give us the second order. It never gives an order for us. The second part of it is when we are diluting shares. For a lot of public procurement, we are supplying to DRDO, and the reason we are supplying to DRDO is the DAP included something called startup has a relaxation. We can compete. We've competed against L&T and won a tender. That speaks volumes of the opportunity that was given. But the opportunity, where does it stop, is something that you need to please look at, sir. The reason is that the startup certification is only valid for 10 years, where we wait for 7 years, 8 years for space policies to come in or space acts to be ready, the prototype to be ready, and then the commercialization time is not available, which means that the defense and the space entities need an extension on the startup relaxation so that we can continue to support in terms of building new technologies for procurement. Second is that it is cost-to-cost approach that is taken by TDF, and a measure that needs to be taken far forward in terms of the cost of the human resources that will be used in these projects and the kind of technologies that needs to be built in. The reason is that the day we dilute our shares below 51%, we are no longer the startup under the financial rules. You know how much dilution most of the companies have done here. So I think that is something that is very crucial to be understood, how the procurement approaches are such way structured that we no longer be called startups by the time we can actually sell you commercial. And then we are competing with people where we've developed cutting edge technology on an L1 basis. That makes it a little unfair imbalance for us to provide you the best possible solution in this industry. We would like that opportunity for us to provide you the best solution. We would like to continue to build those solutions in India. We would like to be funded by Indian venture capital companies to have our corporate offices here. And I think there are steps that can be easily taken, which are more simpler, which is one of the steps is Indian government has a fund of funds which is under SIDBI, which invests 30,000 crores into venture capital firms. The venture capital firms would like to invest in IT companies, sir, not in the defense or the space industry. Because I think at the end of the day, they also have a mandate in terms of their return on investment. I think incentivizing the venture capital companies which have been funded by the Indian government to invest more in the defense and the space companies that are producing solutions for either DRDO, the services directly, I think that will take a long way in terms of us reaching that self-sustenance. Thank you again.
Kranti, in his young age, brings a lot of knowledge, a lot of information about startups. he has felt the pangs of it, and more importantly, apart from what he is doing, he is the last man to tell me what is happening in the startup world. We thank you for articulating what is happening in the industry and what are your challenges, and some of them you have conveyed it to the right people. I'm very sure it will be taken forward from here. Now, the last speaker, for whom I would be only giving 5 minutes, with his permission, is Mr. Rohan Verma, who is the CEO and the Executive Director of MapMyIndia, the Indian Google. Or I would say far better. He would speak on enabling geodigital technology. Now, just briefly about him and his company. In 1995, two young people came back to serve the nation. They were working in America, and that was Rakesh and Rashmi Verma. They decided that they are going to do something in India. And that startup which started then is today a company which is the founder member of the Indian Space Association. What all MapMyIndia has done and where they have reached, I will leave it to Rohan to tell you about it. Just a few words about Rohan. He's also been in the industry now for 17 plus years. He's a graduate of engineering from Stanford University, USA, and he was awarded the President's Award for academic excellence there. He's also received his master's degrees of business administration with distinction from the London Business School. Presently, he is a member of the CII National Committee on Space. He also is, of course, a founder member of the Indian Space Association, and he has also served on the Internet and Mobile Associations of India. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you for the opportunity, and yes, I will keep myself to just 5 minutes. General Bhatt, you rightly said we are India's Google and much better. And so part of my talk will be on Atmanirbhar and ensuring that whether defense, commercial, consumer, we have the ability to serve India with strength in a self-reliant manner. And yes, I grew up in Delhi, studied in a school nearby, and my parents are from BITS Pilani and IIT Roorkee. And the common thread towards our mission since 1995 was to create India's digital map, walk the ground, survey the country, create a digital map that could serve infinite use cases, which my parents believed in 95. And when I was 19, in 2004 and got involved for our internet mapping technologies, I believe the same too. Now, in the face of an international giant which has monopolized, our industry, I would say from the consumer perspective, how did we build a sustainable business? And I think it's important for industry and startups to recognize that to serve the defense, serve the country, you've got to be strong, you've got to be profitable, you've got to be growing. We found 2,000 large enterprise customers and made them dependent on us for maps or geospatial and IoT. Whether companies like Apple or Amazon, or almost 80 to 90% of vehicles coming with navigation systems in India, they rely on MapMyIndia. That helped us to build a profitable, growing company, which we were able to publicly list in December 2021. So that this is an Indian-owned, Indian-controlled company, Indian-owned and Indian-controlled products that by virtue of being in this industry for 27 years, servicing customers across the board, including the Indian Navy in the early 90s as one of our esteemed clients, and then Digital Sky platform of Ministry of Civil Aviation for drone regulation just as of last few years, we've been able to understand thousands of problem statements of how enterprises need to use geospatial intelligence. And so whether it is giving demographic profiling at a 200 meter by 200 meter grid in urban or rural areas, potentially also border areas, where people can understand intelligently who is there, what is happening there, what type of infrastructure exists, what type of potential opportunities or threats exist, so that decision making can happen. This is an analytics use case. That people can use. I mean, and our purpose over the last 3-4 years, or I mean, we've attempted for, I would say, 10 years now, openly offering to the defense and intelligence agencies leverage MapMyIndia's potential for internal capabilities. And there are 3 kind of striking examples. When Kargil happened, GPS was denied. In the Ukraine-Russia war, you see how Google Maps was showing traffic or not showing traffic. People were dependent on that. And then just when the Prime Minister's convoy had that issue in Punjab on the flyover, there was no indigenous kind of intelligence available. Actually, in fact, there was no global intelligence also available because there was cloud cover. And so, I mean, that tells us that, yes, definitely at the satellite level, India needs to have its own kind of capabilities. I'll tell you another important part. We are sending so many, so much geo-intelligence data outside the country by consumers using Google Maps. I'll be quite honest and quite blunt. The amount of profiling information that is available externally, because each of us as consumers use, propagate, promulgate, and then handset manufacturers put that. I mean, I think the amount of knowledge people have first access to outside the country is much more than what we have internally. Why not just use the Indian alternative? I mean, MapMyIndia's app is called Mapples. It's as good. It gives you house address navigation, safety alerts when driving, and we can even package this completely offline for the officers on the border areas. And also the same technology, which is world-class, being used by enterprises, automotive OEMs, we can make available for the defense applications, whether in IoT, whether in drone-based technologies or GIS. We don't need an international Google Earth. MapMyIndia has its own India Earth view that enterprises are using. So, I'm so pleased with this formation of DSA, AVM quote. I mean, your point on civil and military kind of confluence, because yes, world-class consumers have world-class expectations, enterprises have world-class expectations, and the industry has sustainably invested in and built world-class innovations indigenously in India. This can, even as defense users, we are also consumers. We also use these technologies and wonder, can we use it more effectively in our own defense setting? Adapted to the specific needs of security, sovereignty, etc. I mean, on the maps front, I can say whether 2D, 3D, high definition, 360-degree, and updating in near real-time 4D, which now people are calling the metaverse. MapMyIndia has that existing capability. We have invested already hundreds of crores to make that possible, so that now, without the need to heavily invest from the defense side, because I know budgets can be constraining, our only ask or desire is accelerate the adoption, infusion, promulgation of these maps and technologies within the defense. It will enable our country to fight the adversaries, whether it's China or Pakistan, or the difficult kind of relations, flip-flop relations, I would say, with rest of the world. India can be self-reliant. If on the enterprise side we are becoming self-reliant, consumer side something needs to happen, defense is in our control. And I would love to say, between some of the 27-year-old startups which are now publicly listed, as well as the exciting startups that are coming up, India's short-term, medium-term, and long-term capabilities in this area that I coin MINDAGs: maps, IoT, navigation, drones, analytics, GIS, and satellites. I think this is very core to geointelligence. This MINDAGs area, India has existing products that can be deployed tomorrow. It has capabilities that, if spent on, can be deployed in 2-3 years. I see huge positive opportunity for India, the Indian defense. And frankly, this is why we started the company. This is why 17 years ago, as a 19-year-old, I got involved. We want to see an Atmanirbhar Sarvottam Bharat. We believe this is very much possible under this dispensation. The way things are happening in the last 1, 2, 3 years, the way you all are here engaging with industry, I think sky is the limit towards, or space is the limit towards what India can achieve, and looking forward to playing an active part as MAPMA India in that journey of India towards the front of the world. Thank you very much.
Before we end this session, and I give my vote of thanks to me as an organizer, it's a dream to see all chairs nearly 100% full and people standing. And for all that to happen, my thanks to two gentlemen, one of them who is here, and that is Mr. Sanjay Kumar, the CEO of Geospatial, and Lieutenant General Chandel. They gave us a platform in geointelligence to have the space track where we have been able to bring members of the industry and the services together. And the purple I see here with a mix of olive greens, blue and white is really, really exciting for me. Thank you for all who are here today. And now, formally, as DG ISPA, on behalf of all my founder members, I thank all the members, all the speakers who have spoken here, Air Marshal B.R. Krishna, Lieutenant General M.U. Nair, AVM Ranade, AVM Kote, Kranti, and Rohan. You have really enriched today's experience for us, and we are thankful to all of you to have found time to be here and launch this first space track and first interaction which has happened between the armed forces and the industry. Thank you for that. And may I request all of you to give an applause to our speakers. I request Mr. Sanjay to come up.